Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivanadhari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivanadhari. Yasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivanadhari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivanadhari. Yasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada. Jayam Vishnu Paramahansa Parvakacharya Astacharya Satashi Shiman, His Divine Loving Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Goswami, Srila Prabhupada Ki. Jayam Vishnu Paramahansa Parvakacharya Astacharya Satashi Shiman, His Divine Loving Grace, Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Goswami, Srila Prabhupada Ki. Ananta Koi Vaishnavinda Ki, Namacharya Haridas Thakur Ki, Brahmashika Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita, Shri Gadhar, Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Ki, Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath, Samakunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki, Vrindavan Dham Ki, Mayapur Dham Ki, Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Ranga, glories to Srila Prabhupada, Ki Jai. Shibadaya Krishna Vistaya Bhutale, Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swamini Tanami. Namaste Saraswati Devi, Gauravana Vachani, Sasasini Pasakaya Desadani. Om Aganatamrandasya Jananjana Salakaya Chaksu Militanyena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manovistam Sapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadam Mayam Dadanti Swapadantikam. I'll start off apologizing in advance that I'm here instead of Daiva Shakti. I'm sorry to disappoint you in any way, because she does these in such an amazing, detailed manner. But I believe when we left off, Srila Prabhupada had just received initiation from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And it also mentioned his wife was not so interested in taking initiation or even coming to the initiation. She didn't even come to Srila Prabhupada's initiation. It is not possible for Abhay to travel with his spiritual master, even to see him often. His pharmaceutical business kept him busy, and he traveled frequently. Whenever possible, however, he tried to time a business trip to Calcutta, when his spiritual master was also there. Thus, over the next 4 years, he managed to see his spiritual master perhaps 12 times. Whenever Abhay visited Calcutta, the assistant librarian at the Gaudiya Math, Nityananda Brahmachari, would meet him at the Howrah train station with a 2-horse carriage belonging to the Math. Nityananda saw Abhay as an unusually humble and tolerant person. As they rode together to the Math, Abhay would eagerly inquire into the latest activities of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, his traveling, his publishing, how many centers were currently open, how his disciples were doing. They wouldn't talk much about Abhay's business. Abhay would stay at the Gaudiya Math usually for about 5 days. Sometimes he would visit one of his sisters who lived in Calcutta. But his main reason for coming was Srila Bhaktisiddhanta And Abai would take advantage of every opportunity to hear him. And that was also spoken about earlier in this chapter, how Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had marked Srila Prabhupada because he listened so well. And this is what Srila Prabhupada emphasizes in many of his purports, how important it is for us to train ourselves to listen very carefully. The hearing, as we understand, is the most it develops sense. And it's through the hearing that goes right to the heart and purifies the heart. Abai didn't try to become a leader in the inner management of the Gaudiya Math. His spiritual master had initiated 18 sannyasis who carried out most of the preaching and leadership of the mission. Abai was always the householder, occupied with his own business and family, never living within the mat except for brief visits. And we know that later on that's going to prove as actually a benediction to Prabhupada that he never actually lived within the mat. And yet he began to develop a close relationship with his spiritual master. Sometimes Abai would go to see him at the Chaitanya mat. This is the Gaudiya mat in Bagh Bazaar in Calcutta. This is the inside. And then you have the deities there. And then you have the Sri Chaitanya mat, which is in Mayapur. And so Prabhupada would visit Srila Bhaktisiddhanta in those different areas. One day at the Chaitanya mat, Abai was in the courtyard when a large poisonous snake crawled out in front of him. Abai called out for his godbrothers, but when they came, everyone simply stood looking, uncertain what to do. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta came out on the veranda of the second floor, glanced down, saw the snake, and immediately ordered, "Kill it." A boy then took a large stick and killed the snake. Srila Prabhupada, "So I thought, how is it that Gurudev Maharaj ordered the snake to be killed? I was a little surprised, but later on I saw this verse and then I was very glad. Odeta sadhu api vikshika sarpahaya atya. Even saintly persons take pleasure in the killing of a scorpion or a snake. It had remained a doubt how Guru Maharaj ordered the snake to be killed, but when I read this verse, I was very much pleased that this creature or creatures like the snake should not be shown any mercy." And actually later on, we'll see how Srila Prabhupada had a joyous reaction to when Mr. N had left his body and he died and had that heart attack. That Srila Prabhupada was actually very happy about that. And it was a little odd for some of the devotees, but this verse in the Bhagavatam clears that up very nicely. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was reputed to be so austere and so strong in argument against other philosophies that even his own disciples were cautious in approaching him if he were sitting alone or if they had no specific business with him. Yet even though Abai's contact with him was quite limited, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta would always treat him kindly. Srila Prabhupada, whenever I met my Guru Maharaj, he would always treat me very affectionately. Sometimes my godbrothers would criticize because I would talk a little freely with him, and they would quote this English saying, "Fools rush in where angels fear to tread." But I would think, "Fool? Well, maybe, but that is the way I am." My Guru Maharaj was always very affectionate to me. When I offered obeisances, he used to return, "Dasasmi, I am your servant." And actually, this is an interesting concept, because in the material world, when we advance in something and we acquire knowledge and we think we're becoming better at something, we tend to have this complex of being important or being significant, when actually, as a devotee, the more we take to Krishna consciousness, the more our realization should be that I am a servant of the servant of the servant. Sometimes as Srila Bhakti Siddhanta paced back and forth, chanting the Hare Krishna mantra aloud while fingering his beads, Abai would enter the room and also chant, walking alongside his spiritual master. Once when Abai entered Srila Bhakti Siddhanta's room, his spiritual master was sitting on a couch, and Abai took his seat beside him on an equal level. But then he noticed that all the other disciples in the room were sitting on a lower level, at the spiritual master's feet, where we should be. Abai kept his seat, and Srila Bhakti Siddhanta said nothing of it. But Abai never sat on an equal level with the spiritual master. Once in a room with many disciples, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati was speaking, and Abai was listening when an old man beside him motioned to him. As Abai leaned over to hear what the man wanted, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta suddenly spoke out in annoyance at the two apparently inattentive students. "Babu," he first addressed the old man beside Abai, "do you think you have purchased me with your 150 rupee per month donation?" And then turning to Abai, "Why don't you come up here and speak instead of me?" Abai was outwardly mortified, yet he treasured the rebuke. This is another special feature of the spiritual master. He knows how much a disciple can take as far as being chastised. And so he doesn't go over that line. But with Prabhupada, he could be very strong, and Prabhupada treasured that. And we hear sometimes the devotees talk about him when they got chastised by Prabhupada. They felt it as a blessing. And it is. It's no different than being blessed or being chastised. From the spiritual master, it's the same. It was in a private meeting that Srila Bhakti Siddhanta once told Abai of the risk he took by preaching so boldly. Srila Prabhupada, my Guru Maharaj's contribution is that he defeated the caste Goswamis. He defeated this Brahmanism. He did it in the same way as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did. As Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, Kiba Vibra Kiba Nyasisi Sudra Kena Nai Ye Krishna Tattva Veda Sei Guru Haya. There is no consideration whether one is a sannyas, a brahmana, a sudra, or a grihastha. No, anyone who knows the science of Krishna, he is all right. He is a Goswami and he is a brahmana. But no one else taught that since Lord Chaitanya. This was my Guru Maharaj's contribution, and for this reason, he had to face so many vehement protests from these brahmanas of the caste Goswamis. Once they conspired to kill him. My Guru Maharaj told me personally, by his grace, when we used to meet alone, he used to talk about so many things. He was so kind that he used to talk with me, and he personally told me that these people, they wanted to kill me. They collected 25,000 rupees and went to bribe the police officers in charge of the area, saying, you take these 25,000 rupees, which was really quite a lot of rupees at that time. We should do something against Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, and you don't take any steps. He could understand that they wanted to kill him. So the police officer frankly came to Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. Of course we accept bribes and we indulge in such things, but not for a sadhu, not for a saintly person. I cannot dare. So the police officer refused and said to my Guru Maharaj, you take care, this is the position. This was because he was so vehemently protested. So he made a lot of enemies speaking the truth, which we find can happen sometimes. But in this instance, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta came up with a plan that protected him and protected from getting killed. He actually disguised himself and left out a different exit. And he liked boldness in his disciples. Abhay heard of an occasion when one of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's disciples had been very outspoken at a public meeting and had denounced a highly regarded Mayavadi monk as a foolish priest. The remark had caused a disruption at the meeting, and some of the disciples reported the incident to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, thinking he would be displeased that his disciple had caused a disturbance. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was pleased and remarked, "He has done well." His pleasure occurred rather when he heard of someone's compromise. His displeasure occurred rather when he heard of someone's compromise. Srila Prabhupada, when my Guru Maharaj was present, even big scholars were afraid to talk with him, even his beginning students. So they were afraid to talk with even his beginning students. My Guru Maharaj was called living encyclopedia. He could talk with anyone on any subject. He was so learned and no compromise. So-called saints, avatars, yogis, everyone who was false was an enemy to my Guru Maharaj. He never compromised. Some God brothers complained that this preaching was a chopping technique and it would not be successful. But those who criticized him fell down. Srila Prabhupada sometimes would speak very strongly, especially against scientists, right? Scientists and Mayavadis. And one time in New York, no, it was San Francisco, he was preaching like this, "I will kick them in the head." He was being so forceful. And then he stopped the lecture and he says, "I can talk that way, but you cannot." So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was known as the Simba, lion guru. On occasion when he saw someone he knew to be a proponent of impersonalism, he would call that person over and challenge, "Why are you cheating the people with Mayavadi philosophy?" He would often tell his disciples not to compromise. "Why should you go flatter?" He would say, "You should speak the plain truth without any flattery. Money will come anyway." Whenever Srila Bhaktisiddhanta wrote or spoke the Vaishnava philosophy, he was uncompromising. The conclusion was according to the Shastra and the logic strong. But sometimes Abhay would hear his spiritual master express the external teaching in a unique way that Abhay knew he would never forget. "Don't try to see God," Srila Bhaktisiddhanta would say, "but act in such a way that God sees you." Srila Bhaktisiddhanta condemned temple proprietors who made a business of showing the deity for a living. To be a sweeper in the street was more honorable, he said. He coined a Bengali phrase, "Shalagram dvara badam banga." The priests started taking the Shalagram deity as a stone for cracking nuts. In other words, if a person shows the Shalagram form of the Lord or any form of the deity simply with a view to make money, then he is seeing the deity not as the Lord, but as a stone, a means for earning his livelihood. Abhay had the opportunity to see his spiritual master deal with the nationalist Subhas Chandra Bose. That's him here. Who had been Abhay's schoolmate at Scottish Churches College. Bose had come in a somewhat critical mood, concerned about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta recruiting young men into religious life. Srila Prabhupada, Subhas Chandra Bose came to my Guru Maharaj and said, "So many people you have captured. They are doing nothing for nationalism." My Guru Maharaj replied, "Well, for your national propaganda, you require very strong men, but these people are very weak. You can see they are very skinny, so don't put your glance upon them. Let them eat something and chant Hare Krishna." In this way, he avoided him. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta used to say that when the day came when the high court judges were devotees of Krishna with Vaishnava tilak on their foreheads, then he would know that the mission was spread and Krishna consciousness was becoming successful. Srila Prabhupada used to repeat that also. He said that Jesus Christ was a Shaktavadesh avatar, an empowered incarnation of God. How can it be otherwise, he said. He sacrificed everything for God. In his scholarly language, he declared the materialistic demeanor cannot possibly stretch to the transcendental autocrat. But sometimes in speech he praised it in a more down-to-earth way. The mundane scholars who are trying to understand the Supreme Lord by their senses and mental speculation are like a person trying to taste the honey of a bottle by licking the outside of the bottle. You recognize that from the introduction of the Bhagavad Gita, right? Philosophy without religion, he said, is dry speculation. And religion without philosophy is sentiment and sometimes fanaticism. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said that the whole world was simply a society of cheaters and cheated. He gave the example that loose women often visit certain holy places in India with the idea of seducing a sadhu, thinking that to have a child by a sadhu is prestigious. And immoral men dress themselves as sadhus, hoping to be seduced by the cheating women. His conclusion, a person should aspire to leave the material world and go back to Godhead because this material world is not fit place for a gentleman. Abai saw that when the disciples asked his spiritual master about something in the future, he never replied, "Yes, it is going to happen," or "Yes, we are going to do that." Rather, he would say, "Yes, if Krishna desires, it may be." Although in his younger years he had been an astrologer and able to predict the future, he had given it up. Actually, one time when Srila Prabhupada was in LA and an Indian man came to visit him at his room, and Prabhupada had a low desk kind of like this. The man reached his hand across. He said, "Please read my palm. Tell me my future." Because I guess it's well known, sadhus can see the future. And the man insisted. Prabhupada ignored him for some time. Then, after some time, Prabhupada took his hand. He says, "Oh, I see disease. Oh, death. Oh, another birth." It's a birth, death, disease, and old age. This is all we have to know about the future, right? Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was a lifetime brahmachari and was very strict about avoiding association with women. Once Abai was sitting with his spiritual master when another disciple was present, along with his young wife. The wife asked Srila Bhaktisiddhanta if she might speak with him privately, but he replied, "No, whatever it is, you can speak here. I cannot see you in private." Abai was impressed by this, since Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was in his 60s, and the girl could have been his granddaughter. Regardless, he would not speak with any woman alone. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta liked to make his disciples into sannyas. He liked to make his disciples into sannyas, but one day one of his sannyasi disciples was forcibly dragged away by his wife. In tears, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta lamented that he was unable to save that soul. Yet he did not speak disparagingly of Krishna-conscious family life. "I would have sex 100 times if I thought that I could raise Krishna-conscious children." He would send his brahmacharis out to sell the Gaudiya Math magazine and books, and even if a brahmachari were able to sell only one or two, it would please him very much, and he would exclaim, "You are so nice." In considering whether essays were worthy for publication, he would count how many times the word Krishna or Chaitanya had been used. If these holy names had been quoted sufficiently, he would say, "That's all right, this can be used." He would say in Bengali, "Pran achayar se tu prachar." A person must have life to be a preacher. A dead man cannot preach. When some of his preachers who had gone to chant and speak reported that no one had attended their meetings, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta replied, "That doesn't matter. The four walls will hear you. That is sufficient. Don't be disappointed. Go on chanting." And in commenting on the fact that some of his disciples had fallen away, "Some of the soldiers will die," he said. But he did not want his disciples to lead an easygoing life. He once criticized his disciple as being easy-loving. Nor should they attempt to practice austerities in seclusion. He would sing a song of his own composition. "Mana tumi kishir Vaishnava." My dear mind, what kind of Vaishnava are you? You are chanting Hare Krishna in a solitary place, imitating the great saints Haridas Thakur and Rupa Goswami. But your meditation is actually to think of women and money. Your mind is filled with such dirty things, so your bhajan is simply cheating. He taught that if a devotee gave up his preaching in the city in favor of solitary meditation, that was a method of cheating by imitating the great saints in hopes of getting cheap adoration from others. Therefore, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta never liked to open a branch of the Gaudiya Math in a place that was not very much populated. Abai went on listening to his spiritual master at every opportunity, but rarely did Abai put a philosophical inquiry before him. He preferred simply to listen. Srila Prabhupada, I never asked my spiritual master a question except one. How can I serve you? How shall I serve you? Abhay Charan Dey became prominent in the pharmaceutical business. He worked well for Bose Laboratory, and other companies wanted him as their agent. He had hopes of becoming rich. Srila Prabhupada, my Guru Maharaj ordered me, you do this. But I thought, let me first of all become a rich man. Then I shall do. In the beginning I was thinking, now my godbrothers have taken sannyas. They are begging from door to door. Why shall I beg? Let me earn money and start Krishna consciousness. The biggest pharmaceutical company in India, Bengal Chemical, made him an offer. But when they did not fulfill all his conditions, he turned them down, though later he regretted it. Still, there were good signs. The astrologer had predicted he could become one of India's richest men, and Dr. Kartik Bose had told his father-in-law, he's a very intelligent man. But there were also other signs. As many accounts as he had secured by his wide travels, there were also that many bills to collect. Many of the accounts began to fall behind in their payments, and the accumulated debt began to grow until he owed Bose Laboratories a total of 10,000 rupees. And Abe had enemies. The manager who had taken over Abe's old position as office manager with Bose Laboratories in Calcutta tried to turn Dr. Bose against Abe, insinuating that he was too independent. They had heard of his negotiating with Bengal Chemical, and the new manager attributed the accumulated debts to Abe's lack of loyalty to the Home Office. Kartik Bose remained favorably inclined towards Abe, but when that debt became a financial strain, he went to Allahabad to investigate. At Prague Pharmacy, he spoke with Dr. Ghosh, who told him, he is a very honest man. It's no fault of his. In good faith, he gave all these chemists drugs and credit, but he can't realize the money. All right, Dr. Bose said, but I can't go on giving him money. Abe went over the accounts with Dr. Kartik Bose, and they both agreed that the best way to settle the matter was for Dr. Bose to take over the Prague Pharmacy and all of Abe's accounts. Thus, Abe was absolved of all debt, but unemployed. Atulananda Brahmachari approached him. Why don't you come to the Mat? Now you are free. Abe began to visit more frequently the nearby Rupa Goswami Mat. where the Gaudiya Math men, in their renounced brahmachari spirit, suggested that he depend completely on Krishna, give up the world, move in with them, and become a full-time preacher. But for Abai, there was no question of abandoning business. If he did, what would have happened to his wife and children? He and Radharani had now a third child, a son, so the financial responsibility was increasing. The brahmacharis were well-intended in asking him to renounce the world, and it was fine for them to do so, but Abai couldn't take it very seriously. Without work, he was in a critical situation, but he remained confident and eager to take on new employment. There were other companies that would like to have him as their agent, and some of his old customers wanted him to service them. Even if he weren't boastman, Abe thought about starting his own pharmaceutical laboratory. Finally, he decided he would start his own factory, but in a much bigger city than Allahabad. He settled on Bombay. He decided that his family should remain in Allahabad, and he and his brother would travel to Bombay, take an apartment, and survey the prospects for starting a factory there. Although Radharani was used to her husband's traveling, it had never been as extended as this promised to be. Abe talked with her, explained that his recent business loss had been the arrangement of Krishna. Now again, to provide for his family, he would have to start a large business, and that could best be done in a major city like Bombay. But family life in Allahabad would be temporarily disrupted. He set up a very small pharmaceutical manufacturing operation there in Allahabad, put his nephew Tulsi in charge, and left for Bombay with his brother. In Bombay, Abe rented an apartment on Grant Road, and applying the knowledge he had attained as a manager of Bose's laboratory, started his own pharmaceutical factory. Business was going well when a large company, Smith Institute, wanted him as their sales agent. Abe took the job thinking that he could earn money as Smith's representative while at the same time developing his own business. He was confident of his ability to earn money in the pharmaceutical line. While traveling around Bombay on business, Abe met some members of the Gaudiya Math, Bhakti, Rakshaka, Sridhar Maharaj, Bhakti Saranga Maharaj, senior sannyas disciples of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. Abe recognized them as respected godbrothers, well-versed in the scriptures and Vaishnava philosophy. It seemed he was destined to find his godbrothers wherever he went. Both he and the sannyasis regarded their apparently old meeting in the city as auspicious. Like the members of the Gaudiya Math he had met in Allahabad, these preachers had no permanent center, but they were trying to start one. On behalf of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, they were going door to door soliciting support for a Bombay branch of the Gaudiya Math. Abe wanted to help. As a fellow godbrothers in the service of his spiritual master, he offered them his service. Although as a sannyas, they were in a superior position, in their somewhat helpless condition, they looked up to Abe for help. They had been staying in a small place in Proctor Road and had found little opportunity to make important contacts. Now, they formed a team. Abe introduced the sannyasis to business acquaintances, and the sannyasis taking donations for the new center. Abe Charanavinda was good at collecting funds, and he willingly gave his time. Again, his godbrothers began pulling at him to participate fully in the Gaudiya Math preaching. Srila Prabhupada. We made a party for collecting alms. Sridhar Maharaj, Goswami Maharaj, and myself. I took them to some of my chemist and doctor friends, and in 2 days we collected 500 rupees. Sridhar Maharaj would speak, I would introduce, and Goswami Maharaj would canvass. So Goswami Maharaj very much appreciated, and he began to speak highly about me. For a Babu, he is so expert. He has got so many friends, and he has collected so much. Why should he not be in charge of our mat? Why shouldn't he live with us? Why is he living separately? Abhay visited the Math quarters on Proctor Road, where he joined the devotees in Kirtan and heard them speak from the Bhagavatam. At the sannyas request, Abhay took on the responsibility of finding a more suitable place for the Bombay center. Wherever he went in the city, he looked for likely locations. Just as he had responsibilities for his wife and family in Allahabad, by dint of his initiation, he was responsibly bound to assist his godbrothers. He had to take part in the preaching, not simply struggle so that he might exist in some world of business competition. But he didn't think he could ever live like this. The sannyasis, no possessions, no business, sleeping on the bare floor, taking only simple meals. So again, Srila Prabhupada is an acharya in this way. He was a great acharya as a householder because he took his responsibility seriously. In the early years, it wasn't so serious, and so there were a lot of marriages and a lot of breakups, actually to the point where Prabhupada didn't even want to be involved in the marriages anymore. But he was very responsible. But at the same time, his heart was being pulled to do more and more, and to serve and become more and more absorbed in Krishna consciousness. And this is a nice sign of a very advanced devotee. He was very dedicated to his spiritual master, and he's such a great acharya like that. And any little chance he could find to offer some service, and that extended to his godbrothers too. He understood how valuable everybody is as a devotee. So that was really a great example of acharya. So it was February 25th, 1935. It was the 62nd birthday of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati at Jagannath Puri, where Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was residing. The devotees observed the day with ceremony. At the small Bombay center, the few disciples planned an evening observance and invited local people. For the occasion, Abhay wrote a poem. And this is a beautiful, beautiful, famous poem that Srila Prabhupada wrote in English. Adore, adore ye all the happy day, blessed than heaven, sweeter than May. When he appeared at Puri, that holy place, my Lord and Master, his divine grace. O my Master, the evangelic angel, give us thy light, light up thy candle. Struggling for existence, a human race, the only hope is divine grace. Misled we are, all going astray. Save us, Lord, our fervent prayer. Wander thy ways to turn our face. Adore thy feet, your divine grace. Forgotten Krishna, we fallen souls. Pain most heavy, the illusions toll. Darkness around, all untraced. The only hope is divine grace. Message of service thou hast brought, a healthful life, as Chaitanya wrought. Unknown to all, its full embrace. That's your gift, your divine grace. And this particular stanza was Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's favorite. Absolute is sentient, thou hast proven. Impersonal calamity, thou hast moved. This gives us a life anew and fresh. Worship thy feet, your divine grace. Had you not come, who had told the message of Krishna, forceful and bold? That's your right, you have the mace. Save me a fallen, your divine grace. The line of service as drawn by you is pleasing and healthy like morning dew. The oldest of all, but in a new dress, miracle done, your divine grace. Abhay Charan Das. Does anyone want to say why this verse was Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's favorite? I'll read it again. Absolute is sentient, thou hast proved. Impersonal calamity, thou hast moved. This gives us a life anew and fresh. Worship thy feet, your divine grace. It's because it's talking about Krishna as a sentient being He's removed the impersonal calamity. Impersonalism is actually tainted the whole world to such a terrible degree, and that this is glorifying Srila Bhaktisiddhanta for bringing this personal understanding of who the Supreme Personality of Godhead is. He also composed a speech that really, it was in English, and the speech was very, very good. Abe also composed a speech which he read before the assembled guest and members of the Gaudiya Math. Although his first language was Bengali, his English was clear and natural. Gentlemen, the offering of such a homage as has been arranged this evening to the Acharya Dev is not a sectarian concern, because when we speak of the fundamental principle of Guru Dev or Acharya Dev, we speak of something that is of universal application. There does not arise any question of discriminating my Guru from that of yours or anyone else's. There is only one Guru, who appears in an infinity of forms to teach you, me, and all others. The Guru, or Acharya Dev, as we learn from the bona fide scriptures, delivers the message of the absolute world. I mean the transcendental abode of the absolute personality, where everything, non-different, serves the absolute truth. Like the poem, the speech was personal, but even more than the poem, it was authoritative, philosophically preaching. The God brothers were impressed to hear Abhai's presenting the Vaishnava philosophy so expertly. How was it possible? Of course, it should not have come as a surprise. He had heard the Vaishnava philosophy from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, just like his God brothers. Why should he not be able to enunciate the teachings of his spiritual master, having heard from him and having read Gita and Bhagavatam and Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu? Was he not a devotee in the Parampara? But until now, no one knew he could preach in English so expertly. Therefore, if the absolute truth is one, about which we think there's no difference of opinion, the Guru also cannot be two. The Acharya Dev, to whom we have assembled tonight to offer our humble homage, is not the Guru of the sectarian institution, but one of many different exponents of the truth. On the contrary, he is the Jagat Guru, or the Guru of all of us. The only difference is that some obey him wholeheartedly, whilst others do not obey him directly. The Guru of whom Abe spoke, of course, was Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, the representative of the original compiler of the scriptures, Vyasadeva. Abe explained how Lord Krishna had delivered transcendental knowledge to Brahma, the creator of this particular universe. From Brahma, the knowledge had descended to Narada, and from Narada to Vyas, from Vyas to Madhva. Because Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was presenting the Vedic knowledge as it is, without any interpretation, in Parampara, he was the bona fide Acharya who could enlighten others with the revealed knowledge of the Vedas. Abe continued, "Gentlemen, our knowledge is so poor, our senses are so imperfect, and our sources are so limited that it is not possible for us to even have even the slightest knowledge of the absolute religion without surrendering ourselves at the lotus feet of Sri Vyasadeva or his bona fide representative. This transcendental knowledge," Abhay explained, "had been known in India for thousands of years, and this knowledge, although presented obscured, was India's real gift to the world. We must conclude that the darkness of this present age is not due to lack of material advancement, but that we have lost the clue to our spiritual advancement, which is the prime necessity of human life and the criteria of the highest type of civilization. Throwing of bombs from aeroplanes is no advancement of civilization from the primitive, uncivilized way of dropping big stones on the heads of the enemies from the tops of the hills. Improvement of the art of killing our neighbors by inventing machine guns and by means of poisonous gases is certainly no advancement from primitive barbarianism, priding itself on its art for killing by bows and arrows, nor does the development of a sense of pampered selfishness prove anything more than intellectual animalism. Thus, while others were yet in the womb of historical oblivion, the sages of India had developed a different kind of civilization, which enabled us to know ourselves. They had discovered that we are not at all material entities, but that we are all spiritual, permanent, and non-destructible servants of the Absolute. The speech continued, describing the horrible consequences of a misspent human life, the sufferings of repeated birth and death. Again and again, Abai stressed the need to surrender to the spiritual master. He criticized empirical, mundane philosophers, godless politicians, and blind sense gratifiers. He repeatedly pointed to the soul's natural and sublime position as a servant of God and as a servant of the pure devotee of God. Abai was initiated disciple of his spiritual master for a little more than 2 years, referring to himself as a student, continued. Gentlemen, although we are like ignorant children in the knowledge of the transcendence, still, His Divine Grace, my Guru Dev, has kindly kindled a small fire within us to dissipate the invincible darkness of the empirical knowledge, and we are so much so on the safe side that no amount of philosophical argument of the empiric schools of thought can deviate us an inch from the position of our eternal dependence on the lotus feet of His Divine Grace. And we are preparing to challenge the most erudite scholars of the Mayavadi school on this vital issue, that the personality of God and His transcendental sports in Goloka alone constitute the sublime information of the Vedas. He then ended his speech with an eloquent prayer of submission. Personally, I have no hope to have any direct service for the coming cores of births of the sojourn of my life, but I am confident that some day or other I shall be delivered from the mire of delusion in which I am at present, so deeply sunk. Therefore, let me, with all my earnest prayer at the lotus feet of my Divine Master, to let me suffer the lot for which I am destined to do for all my past misdoings, but to let me have this power of recollection that I am nothing but a tiny servant of the Almighty Absolute Godhead, realized through the unflinching mercy of my Divine Master. Let me therefore bow down at His lotus feet with all humility at my command. He submitted both the poem and the speech to the harmonist. The poem, Abai's first publication, announced him as a competent writer in English, and Swami Bhakti Tirtha, editor of the harmonist, informally dubbed Abai as Kavi, learned poet. Some of Abai's godbrothers also picked up on the name and began calling him Kavi. Most of them, even the sannyasis, were not so proficient in English, but Abai was not ordinary. They could appreciate that the poem was personally written out of Abai's genuine worship and his joy at having accepted a genuine spiritual master, but it was also written strictly in accord with the conclusions of the scriptures. For Abai, however, the glory of his Sri Vyasa Puja homage came when the poem reached Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, and it gave him pleasure. One stanza specifically made Srila Bhakti Siddhanta so happy, and that he made a point of showing it to all of his guests. Absolute is sentient, thou hast proven. Impersonal calamity thou hast moved. Somehow in this simple couplet, Abai had captured the essence of his spiritual master's preaching against the Mayavadis, and Srila Bhakti Siddhanta took it as an indication of how well Abai knew the mind of his Guru Dev. Abai was delighted when he heard that the couplet was pleasing to his spiritual master. One of Abai's godbrothers compared this verse by Abai's to a verse in which Rupa Goswami had expressed the inner thinking of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and had thus moved him to ecstasy. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati also found the essay pleasing, and he showed it to some of his confidential devotees. He instructed the editor of the Harmonists, whatever he writes, publish it. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Jai. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Panchakapa Turvishya Kripa Sindhu Bhevacha Patitanam Pavanevyo Vaishnavevyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna.